Thank you for joining us for this conversation about the power of the liberal arts. Our hope is that within the next hour, we'll really be able to answer questions that you have around what the liberal arts experience in the classroom looks like at Bowdoin, and the opportunities that our students have given the flexibility of the skills that they're gaining and how they're able to take, again, a liberal arts curriculum and apply it to careers and internships beyond Bowdoin. This session is going to be recorded, so we will be able to send a recording to everyone who's attended as well as registered for the event. And we will be utilizing the Q&A box function. So thank you for those who've indicated where you're joining us from. We're going to go ahead and try to clear out some of that to then really allow for the Q&A to be utilized for questions. But without further ado, I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves. So Maggie, can I have you get us started?
Yes. Hi, I am Maggie Solberg. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate professor of English here at Bowdoin, and my academic area is the Middle Ages. And I've been at Bowdoin for 11 years.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Christopher, can I have you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Christopher Herlin. I am an associate professor in the Government and Legal Studies Department and in the Asian Studies program. My area of expertise is Chinese politics, and I have been at Bowdoin for 13 years.
Great, thank you. Nadia, on to you.
Hi, I'm Nadia Celis, and I go by ella in Spanish and she, hers, hers. And I am a professor in Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies and in Romance languages and literatures for the Hispanic studies side. My expertise is mostly in Caribbean literature and culture, and I've been at Bowdoin for over 16 years now.
We have three very seasoned faculty members joining us tonight. And Kristen, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kristen Brennan. I'm the executive director of what we call Career Exploration and Development, which is our career office. And before coming to Bowdoin, I had a number of different careers myself. I was a mediator. I went to business school at one point. I also have a liberal arts undergrad degree. And I mostly worked in some kind of really leadership development or people development in different ways till I came to Bowdoin, which was about 6 years ago now. And I use she, her pronouns.
Great, thank you, Kristen. So as a reminder to the students, please go ahead and utilize the Q&A function to ask questions that we'll get to throughout the next 50 or so minutes. But to get us started, to the faculty members, and again, no particular order, I'm curious to hear from you what drew you to teach at a liberal arts institution, and more specifically, what drew you to Bowdoin? And all of you have been here for a number of years. So what would you also say drew you to Bowdoin and has kept you that makes it a unique experience, perhaps? All right, I'm going to call on someone. Christopher, can I have you go ahead and get started with what drew you to teach at a liberal arts institution? And what about Bowdoin do you think makes it perhaps unique or special in the liberal arts community?
Sure, yeah. I went to a liberal arts college myself, which shall not be named because this is a recruitment event for Bowdoin. But suffice it to say that it was a very similar kind of school. So I really enjoyed the experiences in the classroom at that school, and so teaching at a liberal arts college was really what I always had planned when I went to graduate school. And I think Bowdoin is a really nice environment. I love Maine. It's great here. I've got a sabbatical coming up next year, and I keep telling my kids, let's go to like Tokyo, let's go to London, let's go somewhere, and they say no, let's stay in Maine. So it's a really nice place to live. The students are really good, really friendly, and it's just overall a pretty great environment.
Great, thank you. Nadia, let's have you go next.
Well, I might be the odd person here because I actually did not even know what liberal arts were before I came here. So some students might actually relate with that experience of not really having necessarily being familiar with the model. I went to undergrad in Colombia, and I went to grad school in Rutgers, which is one of the biggest universities, the universities. And however, when I started to look for jobs, for some reason, I had apparently created a profile that was very attractive to liberal arts institutions because I had a number of interviews with these institutions. And at the moment I was on those conversations, I remember thinking, what is this about? Like, oh, this seems like something odd outside of what I had in my imagination, but I didn't know exactly what it was. But since the moment I landed at Bowdoin, I just felt that there was something special, and that something special actually just fit with me. And I recall I came to my interview in February, had to put on a lot of clothes, shoes that were not comfortable. And I mean, everything was very like straightforward, wintry, like snow, ice, and I was expecting people to be miserable, and people were happy. And that was for me like, oh, it's not like if they love winter, there must be something really special about this place. And I came with that big question, what is special about this place? And over the years, I have realized that indeed it was a match, that I was made for the liberal arts before even understanding it.
Great, thank you. And Maggie, on to you.
I think my answer is kind of like Nadia's in that I don't really think I chose Bowdoin. I think Bowdoin chose me, and I think Bowdoin chose me because of my teaching experiences. I taught in the public high school system. I was educated in the public high school system, and that is where I began my career and then left to go to graduate school. And without really knowing it, I was looking for a teaching experience as rich as teaching in the public high school system. And that was also a service, a vocation, a calling. And that's really what we believe in. At Bowdoin, we give everything to teaching, but we also are researchers of the highest caliber. And it's rare to have both those things in one job. And I think that's what keeps us at Bowdoin.
And even taking a step back, I realized we jumped right into the conversation of, what made you want to teach at a liberal arts institution. And I don't want to make assumptions that the students all have the same understanding of what a liberal arts education is, knowing that, again, across the many colleges that do operate under a liberal arts curriculum, there are nuances. So Maggie, maybe I'll start with you this time. Is how would you describe what a liberal arts education at Bowdoin is, and what are some of those foundational skills that you think, again, our students are gaining from their experience, again, within the liberal arts experience here?
Yeah, sure. I think that at Bowdoin, it's very different from my undergraduate education. I went to Oxford University in the UK. I was an international student, one of very few Americans who were there for the entire time, for the entire education. I only took English. I read English. I studied nothing but English. We weren't even allowed to study French. We could only study English literature. We didn't study history. We didn't study philosophy. I did one thing for my entire college education. Bowdoin is the opposite of that. At Bowdoin, we want our students to be very well-rounded. We have distribution requirements that students explore in their first 2 years at the college that are meant to give you a buffet table of academic options where you learn about subjects you'd never even heard of before. You're exposed to all new kinds of ideas and experiences. And then when you choose a major, you are not choosing a very narrow focus. You are always a liberal arts student who's involved with the entire curriculum. And I think that what you see in our seniors, you see students who have left brain, right brain, students who can do it all, students who are creative and rigorous and analytical, and above all, students who can thrive in a lab, but also in a really competitive small seminar environment where everyone has something really intimidating to say. A student who can do all of those things and like design a beautiful poster, all those things. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. And Christopher, I'm going to go to you because I know you mentioned government and Asian studies, which are in many ways disparate fields, obviously connections that can be formed. But how are you seeing, again, the liberal arts, especially in government, which is a one of the more popular majors at Bowdoin. And how do you then help students navigate into different departments?
Yeah, we do definitely get a lot of students who become double majors in government and something else, right? So we get a lot of students who maybe they have some historical interests, so they take a lot of history classes, they take a lot of government classes, they do the double major there. Maybe it's some kind of a regional focus. So I obviously teach Chinese politics, but in Asian studies, we have professors who teach Chinese cinema, who teach Japanese history, who teach Korean literature, and all those kinds of things. So, you end up developing maybe some kind of disciplinary focus that you're interested in, but also you can have room to develop a geographic focus. If you're interested in learning French and having a career in economics, you in France, you can do that, right? I think you're really sort of learning how to learn and how to write and communicate effectively. And I think that's what the liberal arts education does best is teach people how to learn things, how to catch on to things more quickly and adjust to changing environments.
And Nadia, anything you would add?
I see the liberal arts as a model that follows questions more than disciplines. So human issues, like our big predicaments in the world, are actually multi-layer, multifaceted, issues that require us to think through very different channels, and combine different kinds of knowledge. We have, as humans and societies and as academics, created these disciplines that allow us to have some sense of control on a part of knowledge, because knowledge is so wide and so complex and so intimidating sometimes. But only through the really like the working together of different sources of knowledge we get to, if not to find the actual answers to the questions, to produce the questions that will be real, that will actually honor the complexity of human experience. So as I see it, Bowdoin in particular, which is my own experience of the liberal arts, is about both finding the resources in many different places to tackle these huge questions, but also voting especially with a sense of service and the relationship with the common good, with keeping in mind that your function in life or that your mission in life is also related to answer those questions, not only for yourself, but for the sake of humanity. So that's how I see it.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so much, all of you. And Nadia, I think, again, you brought up so many different points around, producing questions, control over knowledge, and again, really the humanity piece, that everything that we do ultimately we're impacting the communities we choose to be a part of and the industries or the companies that we're all joining. So Kristen, I'm going to pivot to you for a moment. The faculty members have started to kind of hone in on some of these skills that are really gained in the classroom, whether it's, again, writing really well, the ability to problem solve. How would you describe liberal arts to employers who may not be as familiar, or is that even something you have to do? And I'm curious, again, also, what are some of the skills that you think, again, liberal arts graduates from Bowdoin have that make them really uniquely positioned for careers after Bowdoin?
Yeah, I think before I describe it to employers, I'm going to start by describing it to my uncle, which I had to do the other day, right? And we did like the tour, and he said, what is this college you work for again? This one's, he was trained as an architect from the beginning, right? So you just teach people to be smart. And I was like, basically, yes. I mean, like, I also, as an undergrad, had an unexamined view of liberal arts colleges. I just knew it seemed like most of the quote unquote best schools I wanted to go to taught that way. I thought they must know what they're doing, but I didn't have to develop a theory of what the liberal arts were all about until much later. And so I think about it, it really was a curriculum developed to create leaders and support leaders. And to lead, you have to understand lots of different perspectives and lots of different disciplines. So I think all the things that everybody said about the most challenging issues of our times have interdisciplinary solutions. They have to. And so in this environment, you're approaching problems from lots of different angles. And you're also going to know people who approach things from a different angle, because you're going to be rooming with, living with, working with colleagues later on, classmates today, who came at this from some other way, and you're going to know them really well. So I think in some ways we set up the liberal arts like it's in opposition to something. It's not narrow, it's not technical. And the truth is, all the schools that everyone on this call are looking at are probably not polar, exact on each side of those. They each have some measure of all of those things. I think it's like, what is the right measure for the kind of education you want? And so I would say it stands you in good stead to solve lots of problems. And when the problems change, which they inevitably will, because there are going to be jobs 10 years from now that we can't even name today, it set you up well to make that pivot, and figure out what you're going to draw on from all these different disciplines that you studied, in a really long-term, durable sort of way.
Great, thank you. And now to get into some of the nitty gritty. So again, we've talked about some of the bigger concepts around what a liberal arts education is. How does that start to kind of manifest itself in the classroom? So to the faculty members, maybe Nadia, I'll start with you this time. In your courses, what does an average classroom experience look like? I've heard, I think Christopher talked about seminars. Walk the students through, again, how you teach, what the kind of experience, especially as a first-year student, might look like as students are getting used to the learning environment at Bowdoin.
Well, the range of courses I teach include from teaching languages in the intermediate and advanced level, teaching in which, we have a little bit of a bigger amount of students, but and we have practices that are more about engaging with the culture, learning worldviews that are foreign to your own, and engaging with everything that comes with learning the ways of living and talking that come with language. And for that, we might use things like project-based education, in which you're just like engaging with a question again and trying to figure out the answers to that question with a number of classmates. We use definitely a lot of cultural products, from like cinema to poetry to music, like protest songs is one of the units that I'm teaching at this moment in one of my Spanish classes. And then I also teach small seminars that are more like based on analysis, critical analysis, in which the very center of my teaching is teaching how to ask good questions and how to better understand not what books or works of art tell you, but how do they tell you? How do they create a story? How do we receive a certain meaning? How effects of meaning are achieved, and how powerful can stories be in order to move people? So why are we moved by stories, and which ways books can intervene in the way that how we feel, how we act, how we create and interpret our societies? So that's kind of like on the other stream. And then I teach also in La Class, which is Latin American, Caribbean, Latinx studies, and those courses are in nature interdisciplinary. So like our intro to La Class has units that are units about the environment, and units that are about, the city landscape, and others that are all about history, and others that are about also cultural production and literature, etc. So in some of these courses, we really turn around a lot of different sources in order to understand how societies have evolved in the way that they have, and how literature and culture have portrayed that evolution.
Thank you, Nadia. Maggie, I'm going to turn to you because you mentioned one of your areas of expertise is medieval literature. So what takes place in your courses? And there's also a question that's come in through the chat specifically around English. And the resources available to students who might really be interested in creative writing. So two-part question, especially because your area is perhaps a little bit more niche to some of the students who might be joining us.
Yeah, I can do creative writing first. I'm working with, I'm doing an independent study with a student this semester. This is a semester-long project designed by the student. He wrote the syllabus. I just approved it. He comes to class with all the material. It's my office. And we talk for an hour a week, and he's a creative writing specialist within the English department. And what he wants to do is translate the Old English poem Beowulf. I taught him last semester how to read Old English, and he's highly skilled. And he wants to translate every single word of it himself and then adapt it into a fantasy novel. So that's what we're working on. I met with him today. It's a fascinating project. He's a really gifted poet, and I'm there to help with the translation. So that's a way in which you wouldn't think that medieval literature and creative writing could go together, but of course they do. What's going on in my classes? I'm teaching a lecture course at the intermediate level on King Arthur this semester. And what we did in class on Monday, I introduced them to close reading, which is the method of the English department where we analyze every itty bitty bit of a text. And because it's medieval literature, they have to learn how to read a dead version of English using massive amounts of research, historical dictionaries, pronunciation guides. It is intimidating. I never leave anyone behind. We all always get there together. But to practice close reading skills, we started with the Sabrina Carpenter song Espresso. I always use whatever the top of the charts was the summer before. So we were getting really deep into the etymology of the word Nintendo and the rhyme scheme and all the double meanings, and it was a lot of fun. And then we turned it on the medieval text and applied the skills that we'd been practicing. So that's been a lot of fun.
Great, thank you. And Christopher, I'm going to ask you a slightly different version of the question, because I know in government and legal studies, there are the opportunities for some of the courses to be perhaps a bit more lecture-based. And curious, again, one of the questions that came in is, how do professors support students in courses that are lecture-based versus what a discussion-based classroom experience might look like? And wondering if you could start tackling that one.
Sure, yeah. So I would say that in general for my mid-level courses, there are lectures. A lot of times, it varies by professor, but a lot of times in my courses, maybe we'll spend sort of like half of the class session working on lecture. I did my U.S.-China relations class today. We always start that class off with current events. So I'd send them, an article or two before class starts about current events, and we discuss that, try and link it to things we've been talking about in class. I did about half an hour of lecture, and then we had another, 45 minutes or an hour of discussion where we were talking about the readings and sort of trying to figure out how foreign policy gets made in China. Later in the semester, we're going to be doing a simulation of the National Security Council, where all of the students are going to take on roles as, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, and so on and so forth, and debating how to deal with a hypothetical Chinese cyber hacking attack. So there's a lot of different ways that we approach it. Even the classes that are more lecture based are generally not entirely lectures. And the upper level courses, we don't have any lecture, right? It'll just be an hour and a half of discussion, digging into big, meaty articles and trying to pull apart what the authors are talking about and what kind of arguments are being made.
Thank you so much. I always get so distracted listening to all of you because I am so curious, especially about describing the courses that you were teaching even this week. So there are a couple of questions that have come in around, again, how students, as they enter Bowdoin, start to figure out and explore the different areas of study and what resources might be available for them to dip their toes into an area of study that they may have never heard of, whether it's medieval literature or again, LACLAS, which is a department that's really unique to Bowdoin. I'm curious if the faculty members could talk a little bit about how you get students into your courses, but also what advising looks like as a first-year student from the faculty perspective. And then Kristen, I'm going to come to you with a follow-up really quickly too. So Maggie, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. We have a system of advising for first years where it is done online over the summer. And then when students first arrive on campus, they've chosen their courses and then we bond. So each faculty member has 3 or 4 students assigned to them, and you sit and you talk and you get to know each other. And I, negotiated with my students on, well, I signed up for this class, but now I'm having this hesitation. You just talk it out. And at Bowdoin, we really believe in the one-on-one conversation. We believe in the human bond. Everything is super personal. Everything is familiar in the sense of like a family. So I think of my advisees as future friends. And at Bowdoin, I feel like the entire arc of the education ends in senior week when students all of a sudden, they call me by my first name. Some of them, we exchange numbers and we're friends for the rest of our lives. And that begins in first year advising. It's a friendly place.
Great, thank you. Christopher and Nadia, would either of you like to talk a little bit about advising or the connections that you end up building with students?
Sure. I think that that's one of the most rewarding parts of the experience of teaching at a place like Bowdoin. Definitely the ability to actually engage in relationships that are long-lasting relationships. And I particularly enjoy what I think every one of my students have taught me as an advisor. Especially as an international faculty member, I think that my students have truly been in we say cable a tierra, the grounding force that has, brought me into what it means to grow as a human being in this particular context. So it's a really unique opportunity to accompany you, the students, in the context of developing intellectually, but also finding meaning in life and kind of like staffing your toolbox with as many possible resources as you can in order to go in the world and lead and live in the first person, like narrating your story in the first person, but also hopefully narrating a story that touches a lot of people.
Great, thank you. And Kristen, so, we've talked about advising and building relationships with faculty members. At what point in their Bowdoin journey do students start accessing the career explorations department? And what's, again, when we think about career advice, there's so many different avenues. How does your office really kind of dissect that so that it is something manageable for students?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Bowdoin is there's so many people that are willing to support your questions and your interests, whoever that doesn't just have to be my office. So there's so many places from the very minute they go with their orientation trips to the clubs that they join, and they meet upper class students who have interesting experiences they can learn from. So there are lots of sources of wisdom besides our office. We actually did do a project to sort of make this really digestible really recently, because I think there's a tension for a lot of first year students between, and people come into different places. Some people are just diving in and getting to know the place and figuring out what they're interested in, which is great. And so people really want to sort of get started on their plans, and we're happy to meet them wherever they are. So we actually created something called the first year side quest. So people on my team had to explain video games to me in order for me to understand why a side quest was cool. But it was really thoughtful. It's just essentially a card with QR codes and things you can do that are so easy. Like, come meet a peer advisor who's an upper class student who sits in our office every afternoon and just hangs out to have these conversations or work on your resume if you want a resume. Come go to one event, join one student club that shares an interest that you have. And certainly take a course that is nothing you thought you would be interested in before. So we actually have a very nice, just little checklist that I like to help students understand that everything they're doing is career exploration. Everything counts. The class you're interested in, the friend you made, the club you joined, that all counts as self-exploration and career exploration. And so you get to be checking it off the whole time. Can't hear sound, Claudia.
Wonderful, thank you. I think I would have learned to unmute myself more quickly. But I'm curious, you mentioned again how every moment is a career exploration and a moment to self-reflect. I'm curious how your office also works with faculty members as students are starting to explore more deeply the interests they have, and again, how their academic experiences, whether it's a classroom thing or research, which we'll get into, might start to translate into career opportunities or career interests.
Yeah, I think that so that the side quest project I just described to you actually came out of a request from a first year seminar faculty member who said, "Can I have something, for all of my first year seminar students to just as a little bit of extra credit or just something I want to encourage that feels low lift but also integrated into what we're doing?" So that was actually a faculty request that we collaborated on together, and that led to another couple collaborations, including an article. So that's been fun. Actually, several of us on this call have been working on just a really simple reflective tool that you can use in and out of the classroom. So you can take note of the incredible communication skills, for instance, you might be getting, as you can just imagine, in all these settings the negotiation you have to do when you're playing whoever is the Secretary General of the UN or whatever the role is in your class. So that you can sort of codify that and understand what language employers are using to describe that exact same skill. So a lot of it is just helping students translate and value what they're already getting, whether it's in the classroom or in an extracurricular. And I sometimes joke, like, all the leadership lessons I ever needed, I learned running an a cappella group in college, right? Like, when else does somebody hand you real people whose lives you are affecting on a daily basis? So a lot of our work is just helping students understand the gift that they're getting from the learning they're already doing.
Great, that's a fantastic example. And I'm going to transition a little into research. There are a couple of questions that have come in that have a flavor to it, but I'm curious if the faculty members could describe a little bit about what research looks like in their fields. I think, again, many students know research in the sciences and in STEM, and what does that look like in the humanities and the social sciences? And then the follow-up question then is, how do students get linked up to research that you might be doing or delving into projects that they might really be interested in conducting? Christopher, I'll start with you with that one.
Yeah, so research in political science, our methodologies kind of vary. For me, I do a lot of archival research. So going to foreign ministry archives in Germany and things like that. But I also do some research, and that's more sort of statistical and quantitative. Right. So we do in the government department typically have some research assistants that we hire for the summer that are sort of shared between the professors. So they'll do various aspects of research for them. So for me, some of it was, well, I've got all of this economic data from China that's here on this website. And I need help putting it all together, getting it organized in a gigantic Excel spreadsheet that covers, 2,000 counties over the course of 20 years. So that was what I had our research assistant working on last summer. For other professors, maybe it's, I need help cleaning up my bibliography and making the format fit the requirements of this particular journal or press or whatnot. So research assistants will be doing a lot of different things. And we also have opportunities for students to apply for funding to do their own research. So I had one student who did some interviews in China over the winter break on popular nationalism, talking to young Chinese university students. And then, she went on and did her PhD and works at the State Department now. So we get students doing lots of different projects.
Great, thank you. And Nadia, what does research look like in Laclas or Romance languages in particular, as well as you mentioned those departments?
Well, for me, it usually begins with a question, and I think the questions that I've been asking myself are kind of around with the same from times that I was a teenager looking for an undergrad program. And I like say a question like I was very curious about how is that about feminist questions. I have always been very curious about how do we find our place in the world as women, in particular in Caribbean culture, and how do we subjects, all of us, and so how engaging with the forces that oppress us and that make us and sometimes even miserable or partially happy, but how do we engage with our own oppression and other people's oppression? So that's kind of like my philosophical question. And then my object or actually my medium to engage that question has been literature. And I look at works of fiction as a means to better understand how, those human kind of questions, those deep dilemmas that are not necessarily so easy to tackle through other medium, because literature is this place in which, authors can explore the deepest of what is the human experience. But in order to understand that, I have to get into a lot of tools. So I work with sociology, with history, with psychology, with all sorts of analytical tools from critical analysis in order to better contextualize what I'm seeing in the book. That also translates in different ways of also sharing with others what I do for research, because these are questions that engage real people. So even when I'm talking about books, I really love to be to write for more, magazines and newspapers. I really like talking and writing about the questions that I'm engaging and not only the books that I'm reading. For the latest part of my work, I've been using as a medium a very well-known author from Latin America, who is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And one of my latest, expressions of my research, I'm actually doing a podcast. And this is, again, taking what I learned from what books can do and trying to transmit it into more and more people's engaging with these human questions. In the classroom, one of my big passions is literature written by women and Latin American women. And just last semester, I was teaching this course about 21st century women writers and what it seems to be like a new boom of writing by women in Latin America. And I really had this very ambitious goal of better understanding the whole landscape of what was happening in different countries at the same time, and it's contemporary literature. So I decided that I was going to take my students as researchers in this trip, and each of them got a different country and work in teams to make it, collect data on what is going on, but also do critical analysis on the authors. And we use artificial intelligence and engage with ChatGPT in order to foster some of that research and also data analysis. So we engage with some tools that come from other disciplines again, as to make our research a little bit deeper, and end up producing mostly, instead of papers, we produce things like blogs, like, reviews for books that you will publish in things like book talks or, Goodreads, etc. So the students could be partially active agents in the promotion of this literature that is new literature and that it still has a lot to do to reach their readers.
You gave us so much there, and I'm going to circle back to you since you mentioned ChatGPT and again some of the data collection tools that you've been utilizing. But Maggie, there's a question that came in the chat that was a follow-up to independent studies, since you mentioned the independent study work you did with a student. Generally speaking, how do independent studies develop? You mentioned again the one work with a course on Beowulf that you had done, but how early can a student conceivably do an independent study? And can they reach out to faculty members who they haven't had for a course yet?
Usually independent studies build out of coursework. So the earliest a student can do it, I'm not sure what our official rules on that are. I had an independent study last semester with a second-year student who had taken an intro level course with me, and she is an ES English double major, and she wanted to study medieval representations of like hairy half people that live in the wilderness monsters. She wanted to study medieval representations of wilderness monsters. So we did a semester-long project on that. She just asked me, and I just said yes. That's how it happens. And the English department, I think this semester we have 11 honors projects, and we don't even keep count of independent studies. We have so many of them. It's an essential part of the arts and humanities at Bowdoin are these one-on-one, more advanced and intermediate independent studies and honors projects with students. And I have an honors student right now studying witches, and she's using the town of Salem as her archive. And we're studying representations of witches from the medieval and early modern period, but then also how it's evolved in the town of Salem. And she's won 3 Bowdoin awards so far funding this research, and we're trying to win 2 more. We're trying to catch them all. We want as many research awards as possible to fund this research.
That's incredible. So Kristen, Maggie just mentioned a second year student, and I know the sophomore boot camp program is something that is, particularly for sophomores, it's something that we're really proud of at Bowdoin. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what sophomore boot camp is and how I think it builds on some of these things we've been hearing, students who are doing research, who are doing independent studies, how that all gets incorporated into students thinking about careers during boot camp.
Yeah, it connects to some things that were asked earlier about how people essentially integrate this learning and reflect and figure out what it means for them next. Just really conscious that sophomore year, you make a lot of decisions potentially. You declare your major, you often are deciding to study abroad, and you're starting to think about how you want to utilize your summers in a sort of maybe a more purposeful way. And so it just creates time that's set aside from when classes are going on, so that it's the entire sophomore class, but we make it small by having lots of small group work with those upper class students I mentioned earlier, who are guides for the experience. And it's in some ways just immensely pragmatic. It's like you walk out with a resume, know how to make a cover letter, and how to connect with the Bowdoin network. In some ways, it also connects to something I saw in the chat, which is what do you unlearn and have to relearn? And I was thinking about that because a lot of, I think, what you unlearn and relearn in terms of pursuing things that you want from here on out is that it's unlike admissions, in that in admissions, for sure, everyone's going to read your really thoughtfully prepared statement, and they're going to do it at the same date, and they're going to give you answers that are clear, and probably once only, unless you go around the whole thing again. And so with careers, it's quite different. There's infinite opportunities. They come at very staggered time frames. You have to make decisions about them as they come. And it's a lot of working with people to get input in terms of what you might want to do and what you're inspired by. And not that the admissions process isn't like that, but it's this process sort of showing up on someone's doorstep and saying, can I have coffee with you, is quite different from what people probably have done before. And so a lot of actually the way we focus boot camp is on that sort of interpersonal skill of finding people who resonate with you, whose careers look interesting, and actually breaking the ice on talking with them.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you brought up that question on unlearning something. And I'm going to turn to the faculty. In the classroom experience, in the admissions process, we see students who are incredibly high achieving. They've done remarkable work in high school. And sometimes that's not necessarily the best way, again, for students to explore the curriculum at Bowdoin, or I'm sure you're seeing, again, things that in order to be a successful Bowdoin students, they have to adapt. So I'm curious to hear from your perspectives, if there's anything that you've seen students have to unlearn while they're transitioning, or again, adapting to as they think about liberal arts at Bowdoin. Christopher, maybe I'll start with you this time.
I think I'm not sure if it's unlearning, but I think for a lot of first year students, one of the things that you have to come to grips with is just your schedule and managing your time, and how much busier you're going to be in college than you probably were in high school. So I think that is something that's really important to sort of get a handle on early on, and not get behind. But otherwise, in terms of unlearning, I suppose maybe it's like the 5-paragraph essay or something like that, which is not really something you're going to be doing here very much. So learning sort of good writing habits around, crafting a thesis sentence and things like that. I think that's in the early stages where a lot of the learning is, and that can come especially in the first year writing seminars that every first year student is required to take in their fall semester.
Maggie, how about you? Anything you've seen students have to unlearn or that you encourage them to unlearn?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that come up in every first year writing seminar where you're pushing back against training to achieve something new. And I agree. One of them is don't write an essay in which you tell me you back it up with 3 points of evidence that you found only to back up the point, and then you say what you said again. Research is so different. So I have an assignment where students have to write a research paper without arguing. The aim is to simply find out the truth. And that cannot be an argumentative paper. It has to be an exploration. It has to be full of mistakes. And it's going to take forever. And it's going to be extremely frustrating. But it's the only way to actually learn something new. Students, it requires a real change of your mind frame. I also think about when I coach students on participation. Something to unlearn is the idea that you're raising your hand because you have a perfectly formed idea and you want to sound smart and you want to get it right. No, we are a collective. We all need to release our half-formed thoughts, build on them together, ask the questions that are actually occurring to us. So to unlearn the individual model of participation and become a group, become a community, become a collective. That's something that I find we work on that all semester. And then when we get there, it's a really beautiful thing.
That is beautiful. Nadia, anything you would add?
I'm in agreement with all that is being said. I would say that yes, I'm learning the pleasure coming from being right, because it's not about being right. If you're right, that's the end of the question. And for us, the fun is that's just the beginning, being wrong or not knowing. So like learning to not know, and to just like dive into that feeling of uncertainty and the curiosity that comes with really the real deep curiosity that comes with not having the right answers, and learning to please your teachers and find that that's the object, the goal of what you are writing or what you're doing. It's just like, no, you have to learn the way in which you can find your own voice and take risks instead of like coming up with the perfect product. That's definitely something that I find often, pushing my students to not come to my office hours to ask me what exactly do you want me to do, but to ask me questions and listen to what I'm saying. I think that sometimes they come out of my office more confused than they came in the first place, and that's my job to get you confused before you find the path back into whatever it is that you are going to go deeper into.
And Krista, I'm curious, hearing the faculty members talk about students taking risks, learning to, again, not fully, when they speak, not have a fully formed idea. And I'm curious what you see on the internship side when a student goes out, gets an internship, and they come back and it was a disappointing. They've realized maybe this isn't the career that I want to go to. It's not what I was necessarily expecting. How do you help students kind of reframe the experiences they've had, and move forward after perhaps taking a risk on an internship, and having that be a learning opportunity?
Yeah, that's often my absolute favorite conversation, which sounds cruel, but it's not at all. Because the more experiences you have and you can say, oh, I didn't like that. Great. Now we have data. So, and it's so inexpensive to learn that over 3 months, instead of spending, 10 years at it. So, actually, and I think students feel that way too, pretty immediately, actually, not just us around them trying to give supportive advice, but students all the time come back and say the value of that was, or I learned this one thing, there was something about this environment and the people in it that I really liked, even though I didn't like the topic or the content. I want to find that again. So there are all kinds of lessons. Almost nothing is a total disaster. You find something you can port with you, and it's exactly the same as the conversation we were just having about learning to take risks and try things and be wrong, and not have it all clear, not have it all lining up to something, the 10-year out plan, which is a fiction for most of us. But the 2 years at a time plan is a pretty great thing to try to find.
And you just mentioned data as well. I want to go back to something, Nadia, you had mentioned, and expand on a bit. Bowdoin has the digital excellence commitment where every student gets some top of the line equipment, an iPad, a MacBook Pro, and software support. And I'm curious to see how you are all utilizing that. And Nadia, I know you've done quite a bit of work, again, with AI and some collaborative work with other faculty members. I'm curious if each of you can talk a little bit about, how some of the impacts that you're seeing with digital tools are preparing students for your fields, and again, thinking about the skills that might be required of them as they're entering the workforce. So Nadia, maybe we can start with you, since you had mentioned some of the stuff that one of your classes was working on.
Well, I would say that when concrete, I could speak of other tools. I actually have been pretty into using like iPads to do in-class discussions and help students to annotate their work and coming up with, with direct quotations from the sources into the papers, etc. So for a while, I've been experimenting with different technological tools. I am a big lover of books, but at the same time, I think that we can, find a combination of elements to engage with them and to teach the love for books. And so the experiment from last semester, which I'm hoping that I will repeat soon, was honestly an adventure with the students themselves on how do we engage with these new tools to ask deeper questions and to test the limits of what is that artificial intelligence can do for us, and what is that we need to continue to exercise in order to navigate the world of misinformation and partial truths that necessarily come with artificial intelligence. So part of the experiment was prompting, how do we engage with these with ChatGPT? At the beginning, it was really funny. Like after a lot of training myself and with people in IT, as soon as I sit with 17 students and we start using these tools on the classroom, student of mine is asking me, "Do you know this novel by this author?" And I'm like, I'm not familiar with that one, or that one, or that one. And soon enough, we were finding that ChatGPT was inventing novels that did not exist. So, and because of that, we learned things like, we had to have the conversations about what is the truth, the meaning of truth, because these tools do not really have a reference. They don't have a word of reference. We as humans do have a word of reference that allow us to connect what is created within the screen versus what is happening in the real life, but these tools do not have it, so they don't have a concept of truth. So those sort of like philosophical questions came out of the experimentation with this. And I will also tell you my limit. My limit is the writing. So we used AI to give us data, to help us browse in a more effective way, to even convert things from, words into tables, to make graphics out of what we had compiled in those tables. It's like, we used AI for all of that. We even use AI to tell us, okay, so I need to write a blog post. How would I write that? And give us like the elements that we potentially will use for that. But the one thing I told my students, you are doing on your own is actually writing. Because for me, and for all of us working in the humanities, writing is research, writing is process, writing is thinking. So that's the one thing that I would not let AI do on our behalf. It's like we have to do the writing or we won't learn what we need to.
Beautifully said. And I'm again, just so fascinated by all of the experimentation that you've done. And certainly I think I completely agree with you that, again, the writing piece, we just have to make sense of all of the information that we're getting. Christopher and Maggie, anything you would add to, again, experimentation, or again, utilizing some of the technological tools that students are receiving from the college in your classes?
Yeah, so just today in my dictatorship and democratization class, we were using the laptops in class. Everyone downloaded this SPSS statistical software, and they're working on a project where they choose some kind of political outcome and see if different kinds of dictatorships differ in that outcome. So it could be, labor rights, it could be gender rights. It could be a lot of them pick torture and disappearances for some reason as their outcome that they're interested in. But we were just digging into, how do we use SPSS? Um, and there's always at the end of the semester, there's, one or two students who really were interested in this kind of, quantitative approach and that it really kind of clicked with them. And occasionally you get students report back to you too, like I was in a job interview and they asked me if I'd ever used SPSS, and I remembered that assignment we did, and I was able to say, yes, I have used that software before. So that's the kind of stuff we're doing in my classes right now.
Awesome, thank you. Maggie, anything to add?
It's a small thing. I have a learning assistant, and in all the classes that I teach, I hire one of my previous students to be a learning assistant to help teach the class with me. I've been teaching that way for years and I love it. And my learning assistant, one of the things that she's doing this semester is she has her screen open with Excel, and we are keeping statistical track of participation in the room to make sure that every class session we achieve universal participation. And we're there. And I love that use of Excel and that use of the learning assistant with the iPad in the back. It's a small technological intervention, but it means that I know that every single student is speaking to me, and we are all speaking to each other every single session. And that's a class with 35 students. I've also achieved it with 50. So in a Bowdoin class, it's never a lecture. It's always interactive. We're always talking. We're always in conversation.
Thank you for that. And I love, again, knowing that even in those bigger classes, it's not a lecture, that again, there's engagement happening day in and day out. We have about 2 minutes left. So with that time, we're going to do a little bit of a quick final sell on the liberal arts. So I'm going to start with you, Kristen. There's so many competing things that students are reading about and hearing about what should be, the top priority as they're looking for colleges that are going to set them up for success later in life. What would you say is the biggest thing that they should be keeping at the forefront when they're thinking of their college search process and what might set them up for success in the career world later on?
Small question. It's an important question. I think I really would think about taking the long view, like what's going to stand me in good stead for a very long time. And that could include getting some very technical expertise, including at Bowdoin, that you would need for a particular role. But knowing that they're going to change and they're going to change again, what are the sort of fundamental human skills, interdisciplinary skills that I'm going to need when everything changes? I think would be one question. And then you sort of can't take it apart from the model around it. So the fact that it's residential and people are highly involved in so many other leadership roles, and that you're living and creating along with people, and that you've joined a community of people who really care deeply about this learning model. So they're very supportive of it when you go and find them out in the world. It's an incredibly sort of tight knit community, and part of it is all around this kind of model that people have aligned with and believe in. So it's kind of hard to take those pieces apart. I kind of want to look at all of those people's pieces come together and sort of each option that I was looking at, I think.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway there is long view too, that again, it's you're in this for a huge career, and the building blocks that students need to be thinking about. Nadia and Christopher, anything, and Maggie, anything you would add to, again, how you would encourage students to think about the liberal arts, setting them up for success? Nadia, it looked like you raised your hand really quickly.
Yes, I just want to encourage to find your passions, like find a place at which you can enact and find your real passions. That's the source, that's the fuel that will move you beyond any, at any career path. It's hard to wake up in the morning to do something that you don't love. So if you really are engaged energetically with what is that you are doing, it will take you through every reinvention that you will need in order to remain, current and to lead and to live fulfilling lives.
Great. Christopher and Maggie, any final word?
I just say to do what you're interested in. I think I got B's pretty consistently in political science until I was about a junior or a senior and learned how to write more effectively. And now I'm the professor, right? So just figure out what you're interested in and keep doing that until you get really good at it.
I
Wonderful.
think something I didn't understand. It took me a long time at Bowdoin to understand that our smallness creates a bigness because we are all together all the time. So it feels like this teeming metropolis. It feels like there's so much. It feels like a tiny world. And it's because it's small. It took me a long time to see the paradox.
Great. So thank you, for all of your thoughtful responses and for all of the examples that you've shared tonight. And for the students who've joined us as well, thank you for your time. Again, we have recorded this session, so we will make it available. And I also want to make sure that students are aware that there are a number of other upcoming sessions that we will have in the virtual space, conversations with students, as well as some more niche topics. I know that there were a number of questions that we didn't get to that didn't necessarily really talk about the academic experience, things about residential life, sessions for international students. Encourage students to really look at the Bowdoin admissions website, where we have a listing of all of the programs that we will be having. And please make sure to register ahead of time, because that is how we also will be able to send students recordings. So again, thank you so much for spending the last hour of your day, evening, whatever time zone it is that you're in. And to the faculty members and Kristen, a big thank you to you, because I know, again, it's the evening hours, you're all teaching, you're busy folks on campus. So really appreciate your generosity of time and of wisdom as well. So thank you and good night to everyone. Bye.